Is now a good time to buy property in the UK? So first of all, let me give you a little bit of background on how the economy works. Now, there's a lot of predictions on this, but if you think about a full economic cycle, we have something called a boom, a bust, and then we have sort of this stabilization before it goes back into growth and then goes back up. Now, that's what it looks like over a full cycle. And typically, this period will look like 15 to 18 years in the UK. Okay, I don't know about the rest of the world. It's not where I've researched. But in general, there's around an 18-year property cycle here in the UK. What that looks like on a smaller function is something like this. So let's say we're starting here. It will go like this. So it will go up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And each of these is a full economic cycle that we're going through. Okay, so each of those is around an 18-year period. And you might have heard things like, on average, property doubles every 10 years. That's not quite true. It's every sort of 10 to 13 years. It's obviously dependent on the location as well. There are some areas that are doubled every 8 years, and that's going back since the Doomsday Book. To give you an idea, if we go back to 1952, which is don't know why 1952, it's just a very accurate reading that we have. The average property is £1,900, give or take about 20 quid. So you could buy your average property in the UK for £1,900. What's interesting is your average car in the UK, which apparently looks like this. That's actually not too bad, I'll take that, eh? Average car in the UK was actually worth more at around the equivalent of £2,500. Now, if you fast forward to today, the average property price is circa £292,000. And I don't know the average price of a car, but it ain't bloody that. And the reason for this is because of supply and demand economics and, of course, inflation through time. So obviously, the cost of building a car has gone down dramatically. The cost of building a house has gone up dramatically, with the cost of labor, bricks, and wood obviously being a major contributor to that. So the first thing we're looking at is these macroeconomics. And I really want to talk about what actually impacts that and where I think we are now. When the market goes up, we've got a lot of factors that drive that up. And one of them is low interest rates. We've got higher inflation and something called purchasing power, which I'm going to put as PP. So our purchasing power ends up going up. There's a lot of other factors, by the way, that really drive this, but ultimately it's these three main factors. And what that ends up with is higher demand and lower supply. Then what happens is we have something called a black swan event. And a black swan event could be COVID, it could be the liquidity crisis that we have with seed collateral debt obligations in America in 2007, and so on and so forth. And we've got all of these things that happen that then create a recession. Now, the average recession is between 8 and 11 months. So when people say recession, like, oh my God, this is terrible, it's really not. Like, don't get me wrong, I know people lose their jobs, I know it's harder for everyone, everything's restricted. It's not that crazy. Like, it's really not that big of a deal, okay? And it only lasts for a certain amount of months, 8 to 11 typically. A depression is something different. That is, we are so fucked that we're not going to worry about what property prices are. Everyone's going through like crazy shit right then. So we have this correction, and the reason why I said I think stop being dramatic is I know that's maybe taking emotions out of this, but it needs to happen. Like, you cannot have it where property and prices just keep on going like that. It's absolutely insane. We need something that corrects it. So if we look at the most recent correction, when we're going through this, what's happened recently? Well, what's happened recently is we've got Brexit. We've got Ukraine and Russia. We've got the oil crisis that we had during lockdown. We've got COVID. And then, of course, the interest rate spike. so the increase in interest rates. Now, all of these fairly obviously is going to lead to a contraction where the market turns. Is that a bad thing? No, not really. It's just not that big of a deal. Brexit has pros and cons. Overall, in my opinion, a net negative for our country, economically speaking. Ukraine is bad for the world, apart from maybe a few key players, but we're not going to get there. Ultimately, causes massive disruption. And let's face it, Russia threatening to fuck us all up with their weapons that we don't even know half about just doesn't bode well for a lot of us, right? Oil, obviously not great. When all of that happened, if you don't know, Russia supplies quite a lot of oil to the UK. Suddenly, that was cut off. We had massive supply issues. We still had the demand. Prices went up crazy. COVID, not ideal, let's face it. What did COVID cause apart from stress and panic? Well, what it did was immediately cut off supply for 3 months. If you think about a 3-month lockdown, but the 3 months of demand of a country is still going on. So the world locked down for 3 months, no supply chains whatsoever, and you can't just switch back on those supply chains. It takes time to build it up. In fact, 3 years is what it takes to get back to normal after 3 months. So for each month that we had a full lockdown, it's going to take a full year to get back to normal. Not bloody good. And then obviously interest rates as well. Now, quick economics lesson on interest rates and inflation. So when inflation is just speed, it's acceleration. That's all it is. It's the economy growing. Bit of growth, good. Too much growth, things start breaking. Imagine you speeding in your car and it gets a little bit out of control. We need to apply the brakes. How does a country apply the brakes? Well, this brake is called interest. Okay, inflation is the accelerator. So when we've got inflation and we need to slow it down, we put interest rates on, which is the brake, and inflation starts getting smaller and smaller and smaller, which is what we've gone through. An economics lesson for you. Okay, so this is all interesting, but what does it actually mean? Well, first of all, it helps to explain when there's a retraction. People going, is property still a good investment? It's gone down in the last 12 months. Like, yeah, it's meant to have. It was a deliberate move. Like, this is what baffles me. It's like, interest rates have gone up because the Bank of England decided to put them up. Why did they put them up? To slow down the economy. The economy was going so fast that we're starting to break. The cost of living crisis is because we were growing too quickly. It's a problem for us. Hopefully, sorry, I'm venting at you now, aren't I? But the reason I'm venting is like, it's like things happen in the economy and people don't even question why it happens. That's why it happens. So when the market has had this little dip here, and people are going, oh my God, this is terrible. It's like, no, not only is it a good thing over the long term, it also creates opportunity, which I'll get to in a second. The more important thing we look at is the long-term trends. We always say at Aspire, if in doubt, zoom out. So let's say we're looking at a property and let's say it's had this sort of growth. Let's say the purple lines represent a year and in general, it's going up like this. And then the last year it's gone like that. So you might go, oh my God, is this a good area? Well, again, if you're focusing here and it's all gone down like the whole of the UK and we go, oh my God, this can't be a good area. Look at the last 12 months. It's like, yeah, everything's gone down. Stock prices have gone down. Like everything of tangibility has gone down very deliberately. It's like somebody here going, right, what we're going to do is we do this. And the sole purpose of us doing it is to drive the market down a bit. And then it happens and we go, ooh, that doesn't look good. If in doubt, zoom out. So what we're trying to do is look at the overall trend of this on where it's going. Next is a bit more of a regional analysis, all right? You have to think, if you're looking at the UK, which is obviously shaped like that perfectly, right? And you're in London here versus Leeds or, say, Newcastle. I realise that is fucking awful, isn't it? I'm an artiste. Don't insult me. Okay. Now, obviously, it's regional. So if we think about Leeds, and then we've got the northeast like Darlington. So Darlington, nice area, good cash flow, and in general, over the last couple of years, had artificial capital growth. And that's because of COVID and everything else. But the thing is, if you look at Darlington over the next 30 years, I'm not knocking Darlington, by the way, it's nice for a bit of cash flow. It ain't going to have the same capital growth, obviously. Whereas if you've got Leeds and you've got all of this investment, the Channel 4 move in here, it's one of the economic zones, so you're going to get tax breaks by having a business here in Leeds, and so on and so forth. What then happens is all of the areas surrounding that, which is going to be places like Stainforth, Pontefract, Castleford, some areas of Bradford, some areas of Wakefield, some areas of Halifax, all of those are going to have strong capital growth over the next 5 to 10 years. In fact, in our areas, we've trebled people's investments over the last decade, and that's through looking at local regional analysis. But with this, you need to narrow it down a bit further. So you can look at Manchester as a prime example and look at their economic cycle, and then look at Leeds, which is where we operate. Now, the thing is, we're quite fortunate. We live in Leeds as well. We operate in Leeds. But that's not why we operate here. Yes, we've got our office here, but actually, if you were listening to me just say 7 years ago, I was talking about Manchester. And the reason why is that Manchester was on this part of their growth curve, whereas now they're still on a growth curve. They've probably got about this left. And you can see it, by the way, if you look at time lapses of cranes in Manchester, very good indication there are less and less cranes, still loads, by the way, but less and less cranes in Manchester. So whilst it's a great investment area, it is not going to have the same capital growth over the next 10 years compared to the last 10 years. Whereas if you look at the economic cycle of Leeds, what we're seeing is that same growth curve, but it's more about here. So in Leeds, we're lucky we've got that sort of growth coming in. And obviously this is a drawing here. Might not seem like a lot, by the way, but essentially we're going to look at Leeds now the same way we looked at Manchester 7 years ago. And 7 years from now, I might be on here on YouTube talking about, I don't know, could be Nottingham. It could be Derby. It could be Newcastle. I don't know, because I'll look at the economics at the time. But ultimately, this is why we are obsessed with West and South Yorkshire, because of the South Bank development that's coming in, because of the level of cranes, because of the local economics. So the next things to think about, and the final thing, is government legislation. Government legislation is really important, and I want you to think about what's been happening over the last few years and why I think now is a great time to be investing in property. Again, just my opinion. I think this is one of the best times to be investing, and it's counterintuitive. What do I look for when going heavy? I look for bad news. So I look for things like Brexit. I look for things like COVID. I look for things like Section 24. If you've heard of the Reform Act coming in, I look for things like that. Now, let me give you two scenarios. Would you like to play your odds with all the competition you can imagine? Everyone's got loads of money, they're throwing money at it, and there's going to be 30 people bidding on the same property that you want. That's scenario number one. Or if you believe in the long term of property, which I do, by the way, and if you don't, you probably wouldn't be watching this channel. Or would you prefer scenario B, where there's still loads of people bidding because it's a competitive area that you want to buy in, right? But now there's only 10 people bidding for the property. There's less people with loads of money to compete with you, which means you've got less competition, which means you're going to get the property at a competitive price. Which scenario would you want to buy in? It's kind of like if you were buying a stock, would you like to buy it at this price, or would you like to buy it at this price? Everyone would go number two instead of number one. But what most people don't get is they don't understand what the market looks like in order for it to be this price instead of this price. Well, it looks like what it looks like now. If you go back pre-COVID, we were here. in the market. We've then had this massive surge and everyone was buy, 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 buy. And now we're at this correction piece. Why has this happened? Well, during this thing, we had Section 24, we had COVID, we had Brexit come into play, and all of this has a delayed impact. Inflation then went through the roof, which again is the accelerator of the economy. It got too fast, and then we needed to slow it down. And so we started putting interest rates up. So it went up all the way up to a base rate of 5.25% in August 2023, and it's remained at 5.25% all the way through up until filming this video. So by the time you're watching this, I can near guarantee it's still 5.25%, and I guarantee, I would put money on this, that it will go down in 2024. So the reason why is because they've been applying the brakes and the car is slowing down. Now, this is a really good indicator. If the Bank of England, after meeting, I think it's 8 times, don't quote me on that, and they've kept it at the same amount of pressure, it's because it's working. It's a good thing. So whilst we are in this period of the Reform Act, COVID, the impact, the interest rates being higher, it means that we are able to buy property at a genuinely good price. Now, let me ask you, okay, if you understand economics, we've got interest rates to bring down inflation. There's going to be people going, yeah, but it doesn't actually impact it. So, yes, it does. And very factually, look at inflation now on the government website versus 12 months ago. Doesn't take a genius, in my opinion. But once inflation comes down to a reasonable rate, around 3%, in my opinion, what then would you do? If you were in the car and the speed is now reasonable, you would then take your foot off the brake, and then what would you do? Maybe apply more on the accelerator. So for our economy, what do you think then happens to the brake, i.e. the interest rate? They start bringing it back down. Once finance gets cheaper again, what do you think happens? Do you think more people want to buy property or less? More people. Obviously. So when this happens, and I'm not saying this is an overnight thing, I'm not saying it might not even come down a little bit more, but I promise you, you ain't going to time the market. It was Warren Buffett that said time in the market will always be timing the market, but I think this is a really good time to get in when the interest rates come down and the market goes back up. And by the way, you can be one of those that goes buy to let's dead. I've been hearing it for the last 10 years. No, you're rubbish, Jamie. We've got to tumble down. Yeah, been hearing that as well. And the problem is, you'll be right in 18 years' time when the market comes down again. Problem is it's had all of this growth again. So let me know what you think in the comments. But genuinely, if you want to be a part of that with me, put APG. We've got free one-to-one strategy sessions, completely private. We record them, send them to you, so you've got it to take away with you, and maybe we can help you on your journey. So put APG. This has been valuable. Tap the like button, hit the subscribe and the notification bell. If not, I'll see you in the next video.